Hello and welcome to the Black Ponderer. I'm the host, Neil Trotter. And today we're going to be discussing a famous feminist text, speech, paper, a work by a very famous feminist philosopher and black feminist philosopher, mind you. It is Audre Lorde. And it is the essay that we're going to be discussing. The paper, the speech, is called Uses of the Erotic as Power. And it's actually from, I'm just referencing it from this collection of speeches and papers and essays called Sister Outsider, which is, a very popular collection of Audre Lorde's work. So yeah, the Uses of the Erotic is a quite popular feminist texts, particularly like black feminist texts, and it's been probably one of Lorde's most famous works. And is interesting because she's talking about the erotic, right? And when you hear the erotic, right, the first things you think about is like the overtly sexual or the hypersexual, right? Very sexy, right? But Audre Lorde wants us to think about the erotic beyond that, kind of framework, and also let's think about like why is it that we, the erotic is this taboo thing, right? And we only think of the erotic in terms of sexuality, right? So these are the questions that we're thinking about here. Are there more uses for the erotic, right? Audre Lorde argues yes, right? And we have to think about what are those uses, right? And why, again, let me ask the question, why is it that we are only thinking about the erotic in terms of like the hypersexual, and even, I would even argue the heteronormative, right? And no thinking outside of that. So let's begin. I'm gonna read you some quotes, because this is what we do here at the Black Ponderer. We read the text, and then I add my supplementary commentary. And then if you want to add your supplementary commentary, you can do so in the comment section below. Feel free. Now, often what I've been doing is citing, giving you the page numbers if you got this books, but I'm giving you the page numbers. However, you gotta have this edition, right? Or the page numbers is not gonna be relevant, but it might be different from your version, or you might even be listening to it because she gave it as a speech. So from this text is page 55. Okay, it's the third paragraph. Okay, so let me read you this quote right here. So we are taught to separate the erotic demand from most vital areas of our lives other than sex. Okay. And the lack of concern for the erotic root and satisfaction of our work is felt in our disaffection from so much of what we do. For instance, how often do we truly love our work, even at its most difficult? The principal horror of any system which defines the good in terms of profit rather than in terms of human need, or which defines human need to the exclusion of the psychic and emotional components of that need, the principal horror of such a system is that it robs our work of its erotic value, its erotic power, and life appeal and fulfillment. Such a system reduces work to a travesty of necessities, a duty by which we earn bread or oblivion for ourselves and those we love. All right, so what's going on here? Yeah, so it's just talking about Lorde here, just discussing many things, right? Let me break it down, right? You're talking about how often do we, the jobs that we do, the careers that we have, the tasks that we do to like make a living, to like actually make a living in terms of paying the bills and stuff, or just like not even that, just existing. How often do we love these things, right? Some people, often it's like, oh, you gotta live for the weekend. I work Monday through Friday, got my 9-to-5 job. Most people don't really like their 9-to-5, or it's kind of more just something they're doing to make ends meet, right? And then they live for the weekend, if that you got that typical 9-to-5 work week. A lot of people don't. A lot of people work the weekends too, right? But we live in a world where work, right, is separated from pleasure, right? And that's a shame, right? Now, okay, so let's break it down even further, right? We have this whole notion of, in today's world, hustle culture, productivity culture, which I would argue is part of the hyper-capitalist, late-stage capitalist stage that our society is in, right? Where it's like, well, you got to figure out a way to make what you do a passion, or you got to turn your passion into like some way to make money, and so in that way, you can do what you love and make money while doing it. That's the ultimate dream. But now Lorde is saying like, well, why do we have to do that, right? Wow, what happened in our society where that was a thing that is, that's the ultimate goal today. Like, it's this capitalist type of dream. And the problem then is also we get stuck in this notion like, well, we live in a capitalist society. That's just all there is to it, you gotta pay the bills, right? So you either do what you hate and get the money, or figure out a way to make it something you love, or you got these other alternatives of like, you do what you most days of your life you're working a job you don't like, and then like maybe you'll take a vacation, right? Then you enjoy what you like. Now Lorde is saying, hey, there's something wrong here, right? That's not normal. That's not right. The problem in our society is that we've accepted this. We've accepted this as like, that's just how things are. But Lorde is saying, well, no, that's just because the powers that be, institutional powers, we're talking like capitalist, patriarchal structures, white supremacist, social economic institutions of power, right? These things have kind of brainwashed us into thinking that this is the normal way we should be approaching life. Where Lorde is saying like, we should be finding the erotic in everything, right? I mean, that would be, best for human society, right? But, in our mind, what's best for human society is like the creation of capital, right? Like, that is the ultimate goal. And so we frame everything around that. And so like, if we're talking about, hey, we should make things pleasurable, make things that fulfill us emotionally, spiritually, they should be oriented still off the generation of capital, right? And it's like, why did that happen? How did that happen? And we should be able to separate the capitalism from the erotic. And capitalism has like made the erotic into this like taboo thing that's people do behind the scenes in shame, right? And it's only associated with the sexual, right? And that has happened because this dominant push to just focus your life on the generation of capital, or the focusing on making sure corporations survive rather than human needs, right? So that's what Lorde is talking about. And I continue, I skip down 3 lines. We need to examine the ways in which our world can be truly different. The necessity for reassessing the quality of all the aspects of our lives and of our work, and how we move toward and through them, right? Can we think of a life outside of like, what corporations need and what, right? Is it possible? And you say these things and people, immediately you're confronted with an onslaught of, oh, you're nuts, you're crazy. Like, I'm sorry. Like, today we live in a capitalist world. Corporations are where people work, and corporations have given us many gifts. It's like, and so get with the program, right? But can we, Lorde is saying, hey, we can derive pleasure outside of the capitalist framework, and we should. And also, capitalism has made the erotic into this taboo, which I've discussed, into like, now we're only thinking about the erotic in this very niche, very small, slender sliver of sexual activity, right? Which I would argue would be like the heteronormative, hyper masculine, version of sexuality, right? And I guess, one could even say like, oh, you mean, but also like the feminine, right? Well, the feminine only within the patriarchal paradigm, where I'm talking about the feminine as like a submissive, being dominated by the masculine, right? That kind of femininity. And then there's all these erotic kinks that come from that, which now we associate as the erotic, And Lorde is saying, hey, we can make the erotic out of just looking at some flowers. You could looking at a sunset could be erotic. Reading a book could be erotic. It certainly can. Many things could be erotic. We just have to think about the erotic outside of this patriarchal capitalist paradigm. Let me go to the next page. This is page 56, and this is a second paragraph. The dichotomy between the spiritual and the political is also false, resulting from an incomplete attention to our erotic knowledge. For the bridge which connects them is formed by the erotic, the sensual, the physical, emotional, and psychic expressions of what is deepest and strongest and richest within each of us, being shared. The passion of love in its deepest meanings. So again, a very common theme in the Black Ponderer is this notion like, hey, we can't separate the political from other things. Like, life is political. Whether, you might not want to hear that, but it is. We're a philosophy channel, and oftentimes a critique that people will present to me is like, can you just get politics out of philosophy? But I mean, to me, that's absurd, right? Because like, you can't really talk about philosophy without also discussing politics. So, and when I say politics, I'm just talking about the interaction and the interplay of power between like subjects, right? Which is, that's life, right? And again, when we talk about bringing in politics, like, there definitely is a political drive that's happening, which is the cause of the erotic being this taboo, right? Only like, we don't see the erotic in just normal, everyday actions. Why? Because there's this political drive. Because the people who own power, like capitalists, like people who own a lot of wealth, the way they maintain that wealth, right, is to keep society focused on the generation of capital, right? But when people are not focused on that, and instead focusing on their spiritual wellness and their spiritual development, and the psychic benefits in making themselves happy, and Lorde argues like that can be done through a use of the erotic. In fact, oftentimes when we apply the erotic outside of heteronormative hypersexuality, right, and we apply it to other things, then you start getting all the spiritual development and emotional enrichment and psychic, benefit, right? But that, doesn't really bode well to the generation of capital, right? So, and what I'm talking about like social economics here, which is quite involved in politics, right? So, I mean, that's one thing. But also, Lorde argues is like, hey, we should be making like political activism or like social activism. That should be erotic too, right? And, you don't want to separate, fighting for social justice, trying to end social inequity. That should be a pleasurable, spiritually enriching, psychic soothing action as well. Okay, I skip a paragraph, and this is the fourth paragraph. Wait a minute, I need to get my glasses. Yep, I'm already starting to feel the eyeball strain. When you get older, which is fine. Reading glasses are erotic too. They sure are. Oh yeah, that's a lot better. It feels a lot better. Okay. Okay, so this is the fourth paragraph, second line. Sharing deeply any pursuit with another person, the sharing of joy, whether physical, emotional, psychic, or intellectual, forms a bridge between the sharers, which can be the basis for understanding much of what is not shared between them, and lessens the threat of their difference. So now Lorde is talking about, like, in politics, we often other people, we often it's all about separating people based off of ideologies and nationalities and that sort of thing. And when you see that definitely today, right, with the whole, in the United States of America specifically, othering people in terms of race, ethnicity, social class, how much wealth somebody has, typical thing that we do in our society. And that also disrupts us from using the erotic in ways that are fruitful. I skipped down a line, just one line. The open and fearless underlining of my capacity for joy in the way my body stretches to music and opens into response, hearkening to its deepest rhythms. So every level upon which I sense also opens to the erotically satisfying experience. Whether it is dancing, building a bookcase, writing a poem, examining an idea, right? So, Audre Lorde is arguing like all those things are erotic. When you're listening to music and you're letting your body move to the beat, and you're kind of losing yourself, that's erotic. But, nowadays, we don't think of that as erotic, or, that's not your first instinct, because when we, the social norm when you think about erotic, you just think about like naked people having sex and explicit scenes and stuff like that. But Lorde is saying like, no, erotic could be just that, or, which is not, I guess I should just say just, right? It can be that, the erotic could be like listening to some water dripping. I have a fountain in the background. You may be able to hear it because my audio setup is not the greatest, right? So, that little desk fountain that is dripping the water, to me, that's like, oh yeah, like nice water, very relaxing. It's kind of erotic. I'm a, we could just keep going on and on. I'll give another example. Like, I like loud clocks. Like, I'll have clocks on the wall that like tick very loudly because I like the way the mechanism sounds, the tick-tock. It's very soothing to me. That's erotic, right? And and it doesn't have to necessarily be a sexual way, is what Lorde is saying. Lorde is saying we need to go back to the notion that you can find pleasure, deep pleasure, like very deep, large pleasure with all types of things. Doesn't necessarily have to be sex. It can be. It can, Lorde isn't like against sexual eroticism as well, but she's saying like, hey, we gotta open it up. All right, let me keep reading. That self-connection shared as a measure of the joy which I know myself to be capable of feeling, a reminder of my capacity for feeling. And that deep and irreplaceable knowledge of my capacity for joy comes to demand from all of my life that it be lived within the knowledge that such satisfaction is possible and does not have to be called marriage, nor God, nor an afterlife. See, this is when it starts getting political, right? Because, what's happening is you start finding deep pleasure in things other than God or marriage or like all these other social institutions, and I know I'll get clapped back for saying, oh, God is not a social institution. God is a divine entity. Well, we have, definitely even commodified the idea of God, right? Institutional religion has like, literally capitalized God, right? And so like God is now, the notion of God is now part of the generation of capital, right? And you see that through like the wealth that church, religious institutions hold right nowadays, right? And so like when you think about deriving spiritual pleasure outside of that, right, now it's like taking away the power, the wealth management from institutional religion, right? Or like, marriage, or what else? Oh, the afterlife, right? The idea of the afterlife, right? When you start being able to find spiritual development on your own, or you start realizing like, wait, I can institutional like spirituality, like deep, or maybe it's even outside spirituality, like, or what we know as spirituality, because spirituality itself has been commodified, right? When you start coming to, you do a nature hike and you're like, whoa, I didn't have to go to church for this. I didn't have to buy a brand new BMW to be happy. I could just walk down next to the river, but that's for free, right? And that's so now it's like, oh, now we're starting to see the motivation behind why the erotic is no longer associated with just everyday things, right? And erotic has become taboo. Like there's a political motivation behind this. Let me continue reading. This is one reason why the erotic is so feared and so often relegated to the bedroom alone when it is recognized at all. For once we begin to feel deeply on the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy, which we know ourselves to be capable of. Our erotic knowledge empowers us, becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence, forcing us to evaluate those aspects honestly in terms of their relative meaning within our lives. And this is a grave responsibility projected from within each of us, not to settle for the convenient, the shoddy, the conventionally expected, nor the merely safe. So the fear is the erotic gives us power, because we start to understand like, I don't need capitalism to give me the pleasure I want, right? And so like that's the fear that institutional powers have, and which is why the erotic is delegated or like shooed away. Like, oh no, that's taboo. That's like, you got to go to like an XXX adult store if you want to talk about erotic. We don't talk about that here. Get back in the office, get on your computer, and manage your data with your Excel spreadsheet so you can make us the corporate power and the money, right? Don't worry about that erotic system, right? But I see that's what Lorde is talking about here. I'll read you my notes. I wrote these notes on the margins here. Forces us to understand how institutional power fails to define our being. Yep, because we realize like, man, when I took that hike and I saw, at the nighttime and I looked up at the skies, maybe one time you went somewhere where there's no light pollution, which is very rare to do, right? You don't really see the night sky as, you only see specks, a few stars in the sky, whereas without like all the night lights of the city, you can see like one of the spiral arms of the Milky Way, and like, you might even see some nebulas, and you start, that's some profound eroticism happening there outside of capitalism, right? And that's just nature. That's not like a big screen plasma TV, which can show you that, right? You see the sky through like an LCD screen that's 72 inch, but it's nothing like going out and seeing it for yourself. And you're like, whoa, I could get way more pleasure just experiencing it on my own. And that's one example of many, right? Maybe you have a pet, like a dog or cat, lots of people do. And then you got some bonds formed between, your animal buddy, and that becomes an erotic, not like, again, not in a sexual way, but in a very deep friendship, companionship sort of way, very erotic in that way, right? And you get very spiritually, emotionally, psychic fulfillment from that. right? You start realizing like, I don't really need to buy expensive items, or like, really a corporation can't do this. Like this phone doesn't, the smartphone that I bought that was like $1,200 doesn't provide me with this. So then you start thinking like, do I really need these things? And that's the fear. And then I wrote, what else in my notes? Joy as an experience escapes definition. Oh yeah, because we start realizing like, we can't even define these these fulfillments of the erotic. Like there's no words to describe these feelings. I guess poetry could come close, music, right? And but capitalism is all about definition and categorizing, and like we gotta label it, right? But a lot of like spiritual and psychic fulfillment, notice I say psychic, not psychological, right? I'm talking about psychic in terms of like mental fulfillment that's kind of beyond really what you can get from a school, for instance. And then what else did I write here? The capacity of joy goes beyond the limits of institutional power, right? So, you can only get so much from a fast car, right? Or even like that bit, even if you buy that $5,000 electric guitar, the music, you can develop music that's amazing. And it might not be because you bought that electric guitar. It could be, right? But the music itself is giving you pleasure, and that's kind of interesting because it kind of reminds me of, for example, the punk era, the grunge era, where it's funny because my favorite electric guitar is the Fender Jaguar, right? And then back in the late 80s, early 90s, I guess, when the Fender was doing not so good, or like they failed, a lot of their guitar models were failures, like the Jaguar, right? So they were cheap. And so you had like all these grunge artists, like the Nirvana guitarists, and all these grunge artists. The guitarists from Pearl Jam, they would just get these guitars for like less than $100 or whatever because they were cheap, and they would just make these bomb ass musics, like it Smells Like Teen Spirit and stuff like that. And now because of it, so they made these great songs with very cheap equipment, audio equipment. But now these guitars are very expensive now, right? Because now they got this name brand association with these bands. It's unfortunate, right? But this, it just goes to show you it's not necessarily the gear itself. It's the music that comes out of the gear. It's how you use it. It's the uses of the erotic that make the pleasure, not the items, the materials themselves, right? All right, so I'm on page 57, and this is second to last paragraph. I find the erotic such a kernel within myself. When released from its intense and constrained pellet, it flows through and colors my life with a kind of energy that heightens and sensitizes and strengthens all my experience, right? Yeah, so it's like a booster, right? It's a booster pack, right? And it's like, it's in there. You gotta interact with the world to expand upon it, right? It's the world around you and the interrelations you have with others. You can use the erotic to awaken it and make you feel even better. Okay, we're on page 58. As top of the page, the fear that we cannot grow beyond whatever distortions we may find within ourselves keeps us docile and loyal and obedient, externally and defined, and leads us to accept many facets of our oppression. Yep, and of course, the doom scrolling with the cell phone, right? The smartphone keeps us locked and loaded, right? We're constantly doom scrolling, and we're like, man, it's just, I'm looking for something to make me feel good, but it's just not making me feel good. But I can't find it. I can't, or whatever. It could be the social media. It could be like, mainstream, like movies, television, you name it. It could be like, when I say social media, let's talk about like subscriber counts or like thumbs ups, how many thumbs ups you're getting, you know, the quest for monetization of the videos, and you keep chasing this, and you're just not deriving like a sufficient pleasure. You know, maybe you might get a spike in pleasure. You're like, wow, you know, I got like 100,000 subscribers, but then, you know, if you maybe a week or so that just goes down and you're like, I'm not feeling fulfilled anymore, right? Because ultimately these capitalist paradigms, which is what, like subscriber count, thumbs ups, you know, viewership numbers, you know, social media itself, the internet structure today, blockbuster AAA films and television programs, you know, all of our capitalist paradigms, they trap us and they keep us loyal because we're just trying to find what the erotic gives us. But in these paradigms, they don't really provide us, you know, true erotic nurture, I guess I should say. Because again, in these paradigms, which is the hyper late stage capitalist paradigm, right? The erotic is just pushed into this like taboo, like heteronormative, hyper masculine, you know, docile, subordinate, feminine, right? Paradigm. And that's like where the erotic exists, is allowed to exist. And we don't derive any real fulfillment from that, right? Because there's so much more eroticism in life than in that, right? So I'll keep reading here. When we live outside ourselves, and by that I mean on external directives only rather than from our internal knowledge and needs, when we live away from those erotic guides from within ourselves, when our lives are limited by external and alien forms, and we conform to the needs of a structure that is not based on human need, let alone in individuals, but when we begin to live from within outward, in touch with the power of the erotic within ourselves, and allowing that power to inform and illuminate our actions upon the world around us, then we begin to be responsible to ourselves in the deepest sense. For as we begin to recognize our deepest feelings, we begin to give up of necessity, being satisfied with suffering and self-negation, and with the numbness which so often seems like their only alternative in our society. Our acts against oppression become integral with self, motivated and empowered from within. In touch with the erotic, I become less willing to accept powerlessness or those other supplied states of being which are not native to me, such as resignation, despair, self-effacement, depression, self-denial. And then I put in my notes, existing outside institutional powers, definitions of selfhood allows us to realize our true sense of self. Yeah. Let me explain. So what's happening in our society today is like there's this hopelessness, you know, there's this nihilism, right? There's this existential angst, right, that's going on because we're not finding fulfillment in any of the things that institutional powers give us, whether that's like smartphones, social media, you know, mainstream entertainment, you know, the internet as a whole, right? You know, or even like you go to the store, you buy products and stuff. You know, we're not getting fulfillment from that. Also, the news is horrible. You know, the world affairs suck and they're pretty bad, right? Very tragic. And, you know, we develop this despair, this hopelessness, this like self-effacement, resignation, depression, self-denial. So what's going on? But if we're able to like find the erotic in everything, you know, just daily experiences, which by the way, capitalism doesn't want us to do that because, you know, then we won't have motivation to buy anything, right? We won't go to the store and buy expensive stuff because we can be like, I just go out for a walk, you know? And, you know, when you think about it like that, even, you know, despite the bad things that are happening in the world today, right, you can, and you're still able to look at the sun and find like an erotic pleasure from that. Or like even maybe it's an overcast day, but you see these clouds and you're like, whoa, that's amazing. You know, that's very fulfilling. You know, when you're able to start getting erotic emotions from everyday objects, or like, relationships you have that are not necessarily like, romantically intimate, but could be, but also maybe friendships or just, acquaintances too, right? And, not just sexual, but just like, wow, that was a very good conversation because we really had a deep delve into ideas. Like maybe this YouTube video, it's like, damn, this guy, he's getting really deep into these ideas. Shit. It's kind of nice. Really, like, how often do people get really deep in these ideas? You start really thinking like that. And you start deriving a psychic pleasure from that, right? Then it starts getting harder to delve into despair because you're constantly being reminded of the erotic potential inside of you that's like always there that you can tap into, despite what's going on, and despite maybe the things that are pushed upon you that people or institutions are driving you to acquire. And so when you find your true sense of self is that like that erotic kernel that's inside every one of us, even you, right, even me, and the ability for anything really to awaken that kernel and grow it exponentially into like infinite possibilities and infinite like unmeasurable amounts. What these erotic feelings, emotions, notions, even what they are, they're undefinable, right? But they provide this pleasure. All right, so let me read you the second to last paragraph. We're on page 58. To share the power of each other's feelings is different from using another's feelings as we would use a Kleenex, right? So again, like, capitalism compels us to, use our feelings, the feelings of others for ourselves to some end goal, right? Some like progression, right? Some, capital gain, right? But maybe we're not gaining anything. We're just experiencing the emotion as it is. And just the experience of it in and of itself is amazing, right? And now the result thereafter, who cares, right? That's what's being said here. When we look the other way from our experience, erotic or otherwise, we use rather than share the feelings of those others who participate in the experience with us. And use without consent of the used is abuse. In order to be utilized, our erotic feelings must be recognized. The need for sharing deep feelings is a human need, right? I put in my notes. Othering or refusing to acknowledge, interdependence, right? So again, and then this goes into pick yourself up by your bootstraps. It's a dog-eat-dog society, big fish, small pond, all these other capitalist notions of me, myself, and I, is it hyper-individualism, right? Where in reality, the way any benefit, any type of pleasure comes from the interaction with other people and other, even other objects, I would say. Pleasure and spiritual development comes from interrelation. Feelings become more fulfilling when they're shared, right? When they're shared. Of course, you have your own eternal feelings and emotions that you might need to work out on an individual level, right? Work them out. But eventually, those feelings, emotions, they become erotic through interrelation. Again, it's not necessarily the case that you need another person to derive erotic emotions, feelings. That is something you can do on your own, which is what Lorde is saying. There's an erotic potential within all of us that we can grow ourselves. But it is that at the same time, when we interrelate with each other, right? We're acknowledging there's this erotic potential in each and every one of us, right? Whereas, in capitalism, we often throw away the erotic kernel that's in other people just for our own erotic kernel to expand, right? And, or we manipulate the potential of somebody's erotic awakening to serve our own, and we manipulate, we exploit it, right? Whereas what Lorde is saying here is like, instead of exploiting it, why don't we just share? Why don't we just share and like acknowledge both erotic feelings as equal to our own, right? And interrelate with each other as everybody realizes their erotic drives, which again doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, right? It could be as simple as like sharing in the sunset, watching the sunset together, or many other things, or talking about a very deep, complex topic like what we're doing now, right? Let me continue to read here. But within the European American tradition, here we go, this need is satisfied by certain prescribed erotic comings together. These occasions are almost always characterized by a simultaneous looking away, a pretense of calling them something else, whether a religion, a fit, mob violence, or even playing doctor. And this misnaming of the need and the deed give rise to that distortion, which results in pornography and obscenity, the abuse of feeling. Right. So yeah, we, as I was saying, right, there's certain definitions of eroticism, like what I was saying, sharing, the sunset, looking at a nature walk, having a good old time, petting your dog or your animal friend, it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. It could just be a nice, fulfilling, emotional, mental, spiritual, good time. Intellectual even, you could even talk about intellectualism and how that has been co-opted by capitalism through the academic ivory towers of the university system, right? But there's a lot of intellectualism that can be erotic through like deep discussions of philosophy that you don't have to get a PhD degree to, that doesn't have to be the end goal of your intellectual pursuit. Not that I'm knocking PhD degrees, they're cool, but oftentimes the problem is like we only have really deep intellectual conversations what is like in the pursuit of like an end goal, where it's as opposed to like, well, let's see where this takes us. Let's see what happens when we have a deep discussion. What's the end result, right? We might not have an end result, but it was a fun time talking, right? That kind of thing. So then as a result, like when the erotic is taken out of all of those things, we're just left with like very niche, very superficial versions of the erotic, which is like pornography. And even like, when you talk about pornography, right? You can make pornography very deep and meaningful, but that's not like the pornography industry today, right? The pornography industry today is very shallow, very hyper masculine, very like capitalist, very like commodity product driven, right? Which is, but that's the eroticism today, right? This is what Lorde is saying. And then I put in my notes here, institutional power enforcing false reality. Yeah, the false reality that's only, pornography is only where the erotic exists, right? And so this is why we're not fulfilled in life. Because, people go to pornography, they're like, this was nice, but like after a while, it doesn't give you like, for many people, you need more, right? You need more than that. And again, like the way that pornography is presented today, very superficial, not on a very deep level nowadays, right? But this is the reality that's pushed onto us, like, oh, that's what the erotic is. But Lorde is saying, no, there are many uses of the erotic, and actually the erotic can empower you. It can empower you in institutions of power like capitalist structures, frameworks, patriarchal systems, white supremacist systems, right? Heteronormative systems. I guess, when I say patriarchal, I mean heteronormative, right? They only want a certain slim definition of the erotic to exist, because if there's more uses of the erotic than that than to generate capital, then they're not going to be maintaining their power, right? But Lorde is saying like, hey, we need to wake up, and we need to like, you know, find erotic uses outside of what capitalism says the erotic can only be found. And the erotic can be found anywhere. And, you know, how happy would we be? How fulfilled would we be if we could just derive erotic from anything, right? And we can. But the social economic structures pressure us to not go there, right? So that's, you know, this is what Lorde is talking about here, and the uses of the erotic as power, right? Check it out. You can either use this book, I believe, just on YouTube. There's her, actually, Audre Lorde herself is like giving the speech. And so it's like an audio book, but it's a speech that she's giving. And so you just check it out on YouTube or wherever. You know, that is a very popular essay, a speech, paper that's accessible in many collections of her work. And yeah, I would encourage you to check it out. Well, you've been watching The Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.